Let's stay with that story, and we're joined now by Professor Nirmala Gopal of Criminology and Forensic Studies at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. Prof, good to have you on the program this evening. Firstly, how significant is the appointment of Professor Firoz Cachalia in this moment of institutional crisis, if you will, in SAPS and intelligence services?
So good evening, Nhlanhla. Good evening to your viewers. Of course, I think it is hugely significant, especially since we understand that his mandate at this point in time is to fill in the gap whilst Minister Senzo Mchunu is on leave. So it's absolutely massive, critical, and I think all eyes are going to be on Minister Cachalia.
I want us to take a few steps back here. How should we interpret the scale of this alleged criminal infiltration into law enforcement? And what does this suggest about systematic failures in oversight here?
I mean, of course, I think it's rather unfortunate that we have these, criminal infiltration into an institution that is actually constituted to take care of the safety and security of the electorate. So that is rather unfortunate. However, having said that, I don't think South Africa is an isolated case. We find this in other parts of the world as well. But very importantly is, how do we start getting rid of that? And I think that's where our focus should be. It's a huge elephant. How do we eat the elephant? One bite at a time. And I think herein is where Minister Cachalia's work is going to be cut out for him, because he's going to have to come up with strategies and plans to actually intervene strategically, but also in a very impactful way to start getting rid of the criminal element within SAPS.
Now, many argue that SAPS is largely troubled, but what risks do leadership vacuums like the current overlap between Senzo Mchunu and Cachalia pose, especially for public confidence in policing and the rule of law?
So my own worldview on this is that, unfortunately, Minister Senzo has lost, I think, a large deal of public support and trust at this point in time. So my feeling is that Minister Cachalia is coming in at a time when the electorate is looking for this kind of freshness. And I think, given his own track record, he's coming with very credible, a very credible resume, of course. And I think, given the fact that he comes from a legal background, there could be a great deal of confidence in him at face value at this point in time. We're not talking about how he would be evaluated once he comes into, once he takes up the position and, of course, starts implementing some of his own interventions, strategies, etc. And I think the outcome of those strategies, and hopefully they are positive or mainly positive, will determine how the public is actually viewing him. But I think at this point in time, the public is absolutely looking for someone who has an untainted record.
Fast forward to where we are now, and with this judicial inquiry expected, what precedent or even impact do you foresee that the judicial inquiry will have, especially on long-term police reform, particularly in high-risk provinces like KwaZulu-Natal, for instance?
So I think that would be based on the kind of results or the outcomes of these investigations. And of course, the word on the ground is that everybody's hoping that this task team, or this commission that has been constituted, will actually deliver on its mandate and deliver to the lowest common denominator in terms of making sure that no stone is left unturned in finding out what the actual problems are. So based on those outcomes, and let's hypothetically say that they are outcomes that point to the fact that there is large-scale corruption within SAPS and there's political interference, etc., and provided that the president acts on those outcomes, I think that will go a long way in terms of trying to rebuild the public trust or the electorate's trust in policing.
So for those who aren't familiar with Cachalia's profile, he previously chaired the National Anti-Corruption Advisory Council. In your view, what does this dual role signal about the government strategy to really tackle entrenched corruption within SAPS?
Well, we hope that they, in choosing him, in him being the choice, and I'm sure it was a well thought through choice because this is such an important portfolio. And the hope is that he will bring together his skills, his knowledge, and use those skills and knowledge to start transforming what exists in terms of crime and corruption in the country at the moment. And of course, having headed the anti-corruption unit, there is a huge hope and trust that he will, make some headlines in terms of fighting corruption in the country.
But Prof, with so many inquiries and commissions historically producing reports, but limited accountability, for those calling for real reform, what would it look like this time around?
I think the government has to be the state has to be very strategic. And this is such a sensitive, investigation. I think perhaps more sensitive than many others, partly because, or mainly because of the public interest in this. And we've watched it on news, we've seen it through social media platforms, etc., etc. And I think, therefore, based on the outcomes, it's going to be absolutely imperative that the government starts to act on it, or else I think the ruling party, I understand the GNU, etc., but largely the ANC is probably going to lose more voters unless the president acts decisively on those outcomes.
With that said, and also in your view, how can the new minister then effectively depoliticize the police service while still working under a political authority, if you will?
Yeah, that's a tough one, but I think he's, coming from a legal background, my own hope is that he would be objective. And there are members of the judiciary as well who are really good, objective members. And let's hope that he is able to bring that objectivity to the kind of work that he is doing, because I think at the end of the day, his conscience will have to be his guide.
While we anticipate the work of the Judicial Commission, do you believe the SAPS leadership, including Commissioner Masemola, has the capacity or even the credibility to implement the recommendations that may emerge from this Judicial Commission?
Nhlanhla, I think, and I've said this previously, we undermine the capacity that resides within SAPS. So there is capacity. Is there a will? I think that's perhaps the more important question. If there's political interference, that might hamper the will. And I think what's very important, and as in terms of one of the earlier questions that you posed, we've got to depoliticize the SAPS. Very difficult, a huge challenge, but absolutely has to be done. If anything is going to, if we want to have an effective policing service in the country, it has to be depoliticized.
It then begs the question as to how should civil society and even watchdog institutions position themselves to really hold both the minister and the commission accountable in the months ahead? What would you say in this regard?
I think we need to resuscitate our social movements, because social movements and social pressure has huge impacts. We had social movements, really impactful social movements, pre-democracy. When we moved into the democracy, we kind of lost focus in terms of that, because we believed everything was going to be rosy. We've got our freedom, but we stopped holding our ministers, we stopped holding parliament, the state accountable. And I think we need to resuscitate that kind of thinking amongst our citizens.
Lastly, Prof, how does South Africa's policing crisis then compare with other democracies who are grappling with institutional capture and public security failures as well? You did say that South Africa's case is not isolated.
Yeah, well, definitely, of course, like I said, it's not isolated. I think if one has to do a comparison with other democracies with very similar demographics, And here we must compare apples with apples. And they're probably at different levels, but I think what's different about South Africa is the fact that South African citizens, by and large, are empowered. South African citizens understand their rights, but I think what happens is where we stymie those rights is when we make people believe that because of either political alliances, um, class alliances, etc., we stop that voice. And I think let us now start educating our population, our electorate once again by saying, you have a voice and you must make this difference. And I think that makes us stand apart from other democracies. And we are a new democracy. We've come from a past where we had no rights, and people are completely aware of their rights. And let's resuscitate that kind of awareness once again.
Professor Nirmala Gopal, thank you so much for your clarity on this extremely complex and urgent matter. We will be watching the developments quite closely, and we hope to have you back, of course, as the inquiry unfolds as well. Reacting there to news of Firoz Cachalia being appointed the police minister.